Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is a state vice chair of the party, as well as county chair of Suffolk. I am Judge Richard Weinberg. Welcome back to Let the Record Show. So, Jesse, it was a very interesting few days last week when the United States Supreme Court closed its term on June 30th, and they had a lot of very important cases that came out, and I think they were all rightly decided, with one exception, which I'll talk to at the end. The first case that came out, which made headlines all across the country, is the affirmative action decision, in which Supreme Court made it very clear that you can't use race as a basis for college admissions. That can't be the sole predicate for college admissions and letting people in, because it amounts to an unstated but real quota system, and you may be denying more highly qualified people seats at the table in the best colleges and university just by dint of their skin color or ethnicity. What do you say about that decision, Jesse?
Well, I think all the cases that came forward, and then, certainly the Supreme Court led into the July 4th weekend with a bang. And it's appropriate that it happened this weekend, because it truly is a victory for the American people, all of the decisions that came forward, and certainly a victory and a reaffirmation of our Constitution. The issue regarding affirmative action, and I remember studying these type of cases in affirmative action. There was a place for affirmative action in this country, and I'm going to quote two people. Number one, I do believe that decision brings balance and fairness to America. The cases in terms of that were brought against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, where segments of our nation were being cut out of opportunities because of those universities and those college universities, wrongly applying affirmative action in these cases and such. But I remember, and you probably remember this, but I remember studying this. The retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, during the deliberations of affirmative action, said, "Well, how long would it be? It would be, how long will it take for there to be this fairness and balance here?" And I believe the number was about 25 years, and we're here in the future, almost about that time where the Supreme Court took these actions to balance out everything.
Actually, the first time out when it started doing this, moving that direction, was about 50 years ago.
Yes, 50 years ago. But well, you would be. See, this is why you're far more learned than I am.
Far from more learned. Just remember that. That's all.
But I think more importantly is, and you and I have spoken about this, that there are too many. I believe that there are too many forces on the left, on the right, and I really do think that it's promulgated by mass media, the mainstream media, because if you don't agree with anything, it's you have to be a racist of gender or color or ethnicity and such. But I think that what we have to stop is we're one nation under God. That's what it says as the creation of this great nation. And we have to start eliminating these labels. And I've been saying this, I'm an American. I'm a Hispanic American. I love my ethnicity. I love my culture. Our cultures are accepted everywhere. But this decision also reminded me of a great hero of mine, Martin Luther King, who said in his famous speech that he has a dream where his country will soon live in a time in a country where they're going to be judged not on the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I truly, honestly believe that the Supreme Court, in its decision, was embracing Martin Luther King's words, Martin Luther King's dreams, and what is set forth in our Constitution, that all people, all men, and as it's written directly, are created equal. That's what's important. And I think that there was a time for such laws. I think that time has passed. I think that it's the people themselves, corporations, that are and far left political parties that are instigating divisions in race and gender. Because if you don't agree with them, all of a sudden you're a racist for the color of the skin or the gender and or their religious beliefs. And I think that that's wrong. We need to stop that practice. And I think that the Supreme Court said in its decision that this is what it was meant to be. It's what is within our Constitution and what our society is supposed to be.
Well, that's what the 14th Amendment, equal protection, means.
Exactly. Equal protection.
Equal protection means all people should be created equal.
Put that in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me say this, a couple of comments before we move on to the next case. On affirmative action, number one, there was another group that was being discriminated against. These were Asian Americans in their applications. Mm-hmm. So it's not fair to discriminate against another group in favor of one, because that's only going to increase divisiveness and hostility, resentment. And it's not a good thing to base applications for schools based on racial classifications as opposed to ability. That's number one. Number two, the Democratic Party have already been out there denouncing this as being racist, as you point out. And the President of the United States said that this was not a normal Supreme Court. With all due respect to this president, I don't think he's a normal president, but put that aside, the answer is it's a perfectly normal decision. It was the right decision. It was clear on the law, and they should stop using the Supreme Court as a whipping boy or girl to carry forth an ideological political agenda. It was rightly decided. And by the way, the next thing up, and you're already seeing two things happening. Number one, they're going to do workarounds this affirmative action decision by saying they'll look at other things in somebody's background, their economic status, or the difficulty they've had in life, or hurdles or burdens they had to overcome. And that's a backdoor way of giving added opportunities for different minorities. And that's how they'll do it. So don't think it's dead. It's just dead as a per se rule. They'll finesse it. They're already working on finessing it. That's number one. Number two, the next thing that may get challenged in the courts, and I expect the case to be litigated anytime soon, is this: legacy preferences. If the son or mother went to a particular college or law school or medical school, there's been preferences historically given to those family members. Now, what does that mean? It means that's going to cut into, by the way, endowments, because one of the reasons people give money to universities, if you went to Princeton, you want to make sure your daughter or son goes to Princeton. You're a legacy, so you think there's going to be a leg up, but you make sure that there's a wing of a dormitory or a library that's built in your name, and they give contributions. But that's going to be the next one, and it's probably an interesting argument about equal opportunity or equal protection, when if you're giving fundamentally a leg up to the so-called inherited meritocracy, you're going to have an issue there. So watch that carefully. The two other cases that came down involving religious freedom, Jesse. One, it said that if you're a web designer, you're not obligated to put on as your work content under the First Amendment something that you find religiously objectionable. And I think that was the right decision. And the second religious freedom decision that came out, also I think it was right, that you have to, in essence, give reasonable accommodation to somebody. If they're a Sabbath observer on Sunday, you can't mandate that individual to have to work on Sunday unless there's really a compelling reason that you have nobody else to work. I think both of those decisions are rightly decided. What say you, Jesse?
I believe that there is a victory for religious freedom, and I completely agree with those decisions. And also, in the case of the web designer in the private industry, it's a victory for the entrepreneur. It's a victory for the private businessman. It's a victory for capitalism. How many times have we gone into a restaurant, bar, or whatever, and there are signs that say, the management reserves the right not to serve certain people. And that's not for, classification or discrimination of colors or religion or gender. It's not about that. It's about some type of rowdiness. But it gives the entrepreneur, it gives the person that owns that business, if there's something in conflict with their beliefs, they shouldn't be forced to do that.
That's exactly right.
The state should not force a private individual to do something or engage in some activity that's against their personal belief. We have this in situations where we have Jewish baseball players during Yom Kippur. They choose not to play in those baseball games because it's
Sandy
their religious belief.
Sandy Koufax
is the classic one,
right.
And there have been players since then that have done that. So what this is just a reiteration of that religious freedom, of that private entrepreneur to pick and choose of how he's doing it. It doesn't say there's a straight ban. You're not allowed to do this for this group or this group or this group. It just states it's your personal choice based on your religious outlook or on your personal opinions. It's in our Constitution. It's in the fabric of our community, and it's amazing how these progressives will use the loudest and the furthest examples to attack a court or attack a company or attack a person or a people for their purposes of making a point. And I think that that's wrong.
I agree with you. The next one I want to talk to you about is the student loan decision, whereby by executive order, Biden said that he was going to give like a 10,000 sign-off and free money to students, and he got somewhere between 16 million and 23 million people to sign up and make applications for this. Fundamentally, Jesse, what that was an election ploy, and the kids went for it. It was a sucker's bet because Biden himself previously, when he was a senator, said this was unconstitutional. And Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, had also said previously it was unconstitutional. They did it. They knew they would get away with it up until the time after the election, and they used it as political bait. And the kids took the bait, and they voted accordingly. That was a difference in large measure. There were other reasons, of course, but in large measure, that engendered a large vote by the young kids who thought of getting free money. He never had the right to do that because, as you know, and as I know, it's only the Congress of the United States that enacts the spending laws, the budget laws. It's not for the president to say, here's free money. You can't do that. He tried it. He knew it was a failure. He didn't care. He was doing it for the election. What say you?
His plan worked. He was successful.
Absolutely.
He was able to buy off the young vote in an election that served their purposes. It preserved the Senate, and it made a House majority shrink, a projected House Republican majority that was looking at being at 30 seats to shrink down to 4 or 5. So his plan worked. And, are you really surprised, Your Honor, that there's a Democrat in leadership that it deals with hypocrisy? They say one thing in one office and they say another thing in another office. That's what Pelosi and Biden do. This is not them growing into their positions. This is that they're captives, they're hostages of the progressive left wing of their party. Say what you want to as a Democrat about MAGA Republicans or Trump. At least the Republican Party is not a captive or a hostage to one small group. It proved that during the Tea Party time. It proves it now. We have voices in our caucuses, in state houses, county legislatures, town halls, and in the federal government that are diverse opinions on how government should be. That's
true. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll tell you, Jesse, again, I always say as a House Democrat, but look, I think Trump was a very good president. I think Biden is a disastrous president. I try to speak the truth. I have no agenda here. The only agenda I have is to preserve and defend this great country, which I believe, as we've just celebrated July 4th, is the greatest country in the world, the greatest country it's ever been, and probably ever will be. And we're under, as we've said before, under threat both internally and domestically. And the one thing is, you have a lot of people in the Republican Party who are pro-Trump, but you also have a lot of people in the Republican Party who are anti-Trump. I don't see that kind of breakdown in the Democratic Party, my own party. Everybody in the Democratic Party seems to be rolling into step. And that's very frightening. Now, I want to talk about one more series of cases, and then we'll take a break, and we're going to have John Chachas, who's the head of Methuselah Group, which is both an investment banking house and investment financing. He also is a chairman of the very famous, world-famous Gump's department store in San Francisco, and talk to us about crime in America, and particularly in San Francisco. And he's a very smart guy, and I know John well, and we're going to have him on as our next guest. But I want to talk to you about the redistricting cases. there are at least 3 cases that have recently come down in the Supreme Court of the United States. And so with all the yelling and hollering done by the Democrats about how unfair and biased the Supreme Court is and calling them MAGA judges and that nonsense, these 3 redistricting cases all have the same result, which is they take into consciousness under the voting rights law, which I think is unwarranted, but they've done it to make racial conscious districts that are only going to favor the Democrats. So let's be clear here. They're yelling and screaming about affirmative action. They're yelling and screaming about religious freedom. They're yelling and screaming about student loans. But they're more than happy to get these 3 results from the Supreme Court of the United States, which will favor their maps coming up next year in 2024 for House seats, which will give the Democratic Party a very strong chance of retaking the House, exiting McCarthy and putting somebody else in on the Democratic side as Speaker. That's a very big deal, Jesse. So when they say the Supreme Court is biased, I point out to you, I think they're all wrongly decided, by the way, on the merits. As a former Supreme Court justice, I tell you, and as a former law clerk to a federal judge, I will tell you, I think they were wrongly decided, but it is the Supreme Court. As Justice Jackson always correctly said, we're not final because we're infallible. We're infallible because we're final. So that's going to be the law, and those lines are going to be cut pursuant to giving a lot of authority to state legislatures and state courts, the highest courts in the state, to recut lines. And the net of that is going to be a better chance for the Democrats to win the House of Representatives next year in 2024. Right.
It's amazing, Your Honor. We have not heard the left say anything about court packing as it pertains to that, because, of course, it benefits them.
Of course. It's going back to the H word, the hypocrisy. You know,
yes.
Schumer, our esteemed senior senator for the United States Senate, the majority leader of the Senate from New York, gets up there and pounds the table on Roe versus Wade and every other issue he can at the Supreme Court or on the Senate floor. But yet he attacks the integrity of the justices and the institution as a total institution, showing no respect for the independence of the judiciary. But when he does that, he's totally silent with respect to these redistricting cases. So I said to you, Senator Schumer, take a real look at the total package of what the Supreme Court has done. All right, we'll be taking a break. We'll be back in a moment with John Chachas, our guest, who will talk to us about what's going on in San Francisco, his recommendations, and why this is a metaphor for the whole country. We'll be right back. Stay tuned to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Hold on, we'll be right back.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for an Oikos remix. Like a crunchy storm of sea salt praline pretzels, dark chocolate, and butter toffee, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 Oikos Remix varieties with epic mix-ins and 11 grams of complete protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See RemixYogurt.com.
We're shipping Mother's Day gifts with a rapid-fire round of questions. Ready?
Yes, my gift. Can you pack it?
Yep.
Ship it?
Yes.
Guarantee it?
Of course.
Oh, send gift baskets?
For sure.
Protect electronics? Dog-proof it? Return it if they hate it?
Yes, no, and yeah.
Are you the UPS store?
Hey, we have a winner!
Visit the upsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Visit a store today.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
We're back on Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. And we're joined by John Chachas, who is a good friend and neighbor in my building here in Manhattan, where we're broadcasting from. John is a remarkable gentleman. He runs Methuselah Partners. He has an investment bank. He has an investment firm. He's a chair of a legendary department store in San Francisco. A number of years ago, he ran for the United States Senate as a Republican candidate in Nevada. A graduate of Columbia and the Harvard Business School. An expert in finance and media. And just an all-around wonderful guy. Welcome to the show, John.
Oh, that's a nice introduction. I appreciate it, Richard. It's very nice of you.
Okay, give me that $20 you promised me, and we'll be fine.
I think
right.
that was worth 100.
Okay.
That was worth 100.
Okay. Well, I'm against inflation, so we'll sell for the 20. So, John, you're the chairman of GUMPS, and you know the San Francisco scene as well as any business person out there. Now, I'm very troubled that the cities of the United States are dying, and San Francisco, amongst other cities like Portland or Seattle or Philadelphia, Chicago, God forbid New York, are indicative of this trend. But let's focus on San Francisco. I just saw an article over the weekend which troubled me about they have these packs of teenagers, mass teenagers, who are mugging and robbing and beating up young mothers with their kids. Can you tell me what's going on in San Francisco and how do we save it?
I have a long love affair with San Francisco that goes back decades, and our investment in GUMPS. My family bought the company. We're the sixth owner. It's a 165-year-old business. It is the oldest continuously operating business in San Francisco, and we're having to really assess whether we can continue to be there because our customer base, which is national because of our age, but our local customer base, we call up these customers, and they don't want to come into San Francisco. They don't want to be troubled by the driving. They don't want to be fearful when they walk down the street. They don't want to have to step over human waste and needles. I mean, basically, San Francisco is a poster child for bad urban policy that's failed. And you add that together with bad COVID policy, which I want to come back to for a second, and it's a really dangerous brew in San Francisco. We have bad COVID policy also in New York. There's bad COVID policy hangovers in other places. San Francisco is on the cusp of what I call, a real deep failure. People during the COVID period were taught they didn't have to be in the city anymore if it was unpleasant, and it has become very unpleasant. And to me, cities function if they have four things: commerce, livability, transportation, and safety. There's a lot of other things you want. You want good schools, you want good health care, you want all kinds of things. But those four you got to have: commerce, livability, transportation, and safety. And right now, San Francisco gets an F on all four. And that is not a recipe that can survive. And there are things that can be done to fix it.
Well, why don't you tell Jesse and me and our audience, what can we do to save San Francisco? And again, as you correctly point out, San Francisco is really a metaphor for the whole country in these urban centers. What can we do?
I think it starts with. It's like an alcoholic staring in the mirror and knowing what they are. Cities cannot survive on 3-day-a-week work weeks or 4-day-a-week work weeks. The math doesn't lie. It's that simple. And so we have to start with the premise that these empty storefronts. I mean, you walk up and down Madison Avenue, you see the same thing in New York. The empty storefronts are a derivative of a depressed work environment. People aren't going to their offices. So the first thing that ought to happen is Governor of California ought to institute a tax cut. And it ought to be tied to businesses who in their policy handbook require 5 days a week in your office. And I haven't figured out the math about whether it's a 20% tax cut for 3 years or a 25% tax cut, but it requires the governor to make priority of putting people back in their chairs. And it's an inconvenient thing to say to people, God, we really need people in the city. This thesis of evolved work and hybrid work, it's just math. The math doesn't work. You don't generate enough tax revenue or activity in a city so that the city can thrive on 3-day-a-week work. So create a tax incentive so you can actually bring people back to their chairs. And not all companies will take advantage of that, and there are going to be issues about how you do it. But it can absolutely be done, and I think a large number of companies would welcome the incentive and require their employees to go. Or there's some employees that are going to say, forget it, I've gotten used to not working for 5 days a week. Okay, fine. There'll be some challenges to fill the seats. But over time, if you use the tax code the proper way, I think cities can really induce people back into their chairs. And that creates a virtuous circle. People go to lunch, they go to dinner, they go to an event, they go to a sporting event, they buy something for their spouse, or they buy a gift for. There's commerce going on everywhere. And until you do that, until you come to grips with the fact that the 3-day-a-week work week or the 4-day-a-week work week is a recipe for failed cities, we're just sort of sitting here. It's like sitting here treading water, knowing that we have a problem, but not actually doing anything about it. So that's my first pillar, like fix the commerce problem. And the second issue in San Francisco is the mayor and city supervisors who they either ought to resign or do their job. And if they're going to do their job, they ought to be rolling back all of these policies which permit people to, act poorly in public, to do drugs in public, to, urinate on the streets. My store, we have to wash the front of our store every day. The city has the ability to change the rules. There are 30,000 homeless people or whatever the number is in San Francisco. It's a tragedy, and that number is probably larger in New York. Everybody who lives in these cities wants to do something to help those people that are in need of help. But their conduct and the permissibility of that conduct is destroying the quality of life so that no one wants to come into town anymore. People don't want to come there as a visitor. They don't want to come there for a conference. And that's got to stop. And so the fallacy that somehow allowing someone to shoot up in the streets or take a bath in the fountain below the Apple store because they're a homeless person, that just shouldn't be permitted. And you just have to change the rules and make it, you're breaking the law and you're going to go into jail. And you should not be able to camp on the streets anywhere in the city of San Francisco, anywhere. And you can draw a ring about where it goes. And if that means those folks have to move someplace else at night, then that's the way it is. But that's the only way that businesses and commerce can return. Pretty simple.
You have other ideas to save San Francisco now or other urban centers?
Well, I got one last one, which is on the transportation side. It's a little bit back to this concept of tyranny of the minority. We have tyranny in San Francisco, 30,000 people that live on the streets. We're more concerned about how they are than we are everybody else who's trying to conduct their lives. In New York City, we've allowed 50,000 bikers to take over 20% of the arterial roadways in the city of New York. I don't know who came up with that idea under Mayor Bloomberg, but it has created gigantic traffic problems. It's difficult now to go to the theater district. It's difficult to get anywhere in the town between
But their answer, of course, is this ridiculous project called congestion pricing. They don't understand that they're the proximate cause of the problem. The lawlessness discourages people from riding the subways and the buses. The bikes cut traffic mobility, and they want to tax people for coming in, which is another formula for disaster.
And what they're going to learn is the people who can not come in
will not come in.
They're the very ones you need to come in. They're the people that are involved in commerce, that create the business, that create the jobs, and create the taxes. So there's this fallacy somehow that you can just do these things with no ramifications. The concept of New York City talking about congestion pricing at this moment in time is absurd.
Absolutely.
If you walk from 59th Street to 96th Street on Madison Avenue, one of the most expensive luxury retail shopping districts in the world, you have two empty storefronts on both sides of every single block. Every single block. In my 40 years of New York, I've never seen it look like that. So this is definitely the time that we should institute congestion pricing and have more people that have wealth and money and transact to not come. It's crazy. It's utter lunacy.
Jesse, your turn.
John, thank you for joining us. And I got to tell you, what you just outlined almost seems like a blueprint for the resurrection of our cities throughout the country, not just San Francisco. Because of what you described in San Francisco is exactly what's going on in cities like Chicago and other ones, and our beloved city of New York City and such. But here's one way, it seems like our elected officials, for one reason or another, whether it be in San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, are out of touch. They realize what the problems are. They understand that there are solutions that we can go forward with. What do you believe is what's holding them back from enacting these policy changes? Because I agree with you. I believe that COVID and then the overreach of some of our emergency powers that were granted to our governors and to our mayors and to our county executives have led to an entire new generation, a new group of people that do not want to work. They feel that they don't have to go into the offices. And I don't believe New York City, the retail market is now bouncing back as it should have, and certainly from COVID. I mean, it's worse than even bouncing back from the time of, the attack on the World Trade Center in 2001.
I think the thing that prevents government officials from doing this is, in fact, the failure of media. Most of my adult life I've spent as a financial advisor to large media companies, local media in particular, television stations and newspapers, who for the longest time, decades and decades, they were the defenders of the local city, the defenders of last resort. If you're the ABC affiliate in San Francisco, you ought to be every single night of the week have this as the opening story. The CBS affiliate the same way, the NBC affiliate the same way. The problem is those local stations have increasingly become dominated by the political narrative of their parent networks. And I think it's fair to say that most of the parent networks have kind of gotten in this mode of not, sort of taking sides on the political side. So if you call into question where the COVID policies were sensible, you're taking sides in some way. So I think the media has really done a horrible job criticizing local officials who should be thrown out of their jobs. I mean, quite honestly, the governor of California, the idea of people talking about the governor of California's political future nationally, when you go drive through San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco and ask yourself the question whether those cities look like they're thriving, they're not. And so media needs to start beating the living tar out of the mayors and the city supervisors in all of these places. Seattle, just as bad as San Francisco in a lot of ways, maybe worse. Minneapolis, it's atrocious. I mean, the lawlessness in some of these cities, it's atrocious. And until local media starts to call to account the failure of these leaders, we live in sort of a tribal political society right now where you fall on one side of the aisle or the other, and man, you defend your side to the death instead of actually doing your job. That's what I think has happened.
Well, I think you're right about the media, and I can't tell you with any degree of certainty what's chicken, what's egg. But I'll tell you this, as the House Democrat, as the so-called common sense Democrat, I'm just aghast that the Democratic Party in this country and in the state and the city of New York, for example, which I know a great deal about, has been taken over by a left-wing fringe, a radical, so-called progressive fringe. Working Families Party controls them. Democratic Socialists control them. Being a socialist is not a bad term anymore. It's acceptable. The caucuses are driven by these fringes, and the primaries are really low turnout primaries, and then the fringes mobilize their forces, and they come out and they win the primaries. So there's no countervailing force within this. And then to add to that in New York, and Jesse and I talk about this all the time, this is a one-party state in New York, and California is a one-party state. What do you say about that?
Well, and people get the government they deserve. I mean, in the end, this is the part that's going to be fascinating. Tax data lags by about 12 to 16 months before you really see what happened in a state. State of New York, 2021 tax data was pretty ugly compared to 2020, and you saw lots of wealthy people depart. I would make the statement halfway through 2023 that when the data comes out about 2022, it's going to take people's breath away. I'm a polling person of one, but I know the number of wealthy people I know who up and left and took their business and their chips, and they moved to their weekend home, or they moved to their home in Aspen or Jackson Hole or Florida or wherever they went, and they are not coming back because the quality of life in the cities has eroded. And I think when that data starts to come out, Governor Hochul, Governor Newsom, Governor Pritzker in Illinois, I mean, there's going to be some really ugly conversations because some of these cities are going to face what may be bankruptcies.
Well, remember, the federal money is running out, John and Jesse. The money is running out.
Well, and you have no possibility of the federal
bailout
authorities signing up for. Oh yes, we're going to help bail out these cities. And the fact of the matter is, I have visited in Salt Lake City. This is not monolithic across America. The great thing about America is you have all kinds of examples. I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal recently that we need a real independent look back panel about what did the COVID policies do. It was published a few weeks ago. And part of the problem is as long as media is not covering these people, but the math is not going to lie. That's the problem. Math doesn't lie. And when the tax data comes in and we have a humongous decline in tax revenues in the state of New York, watch out. And then there's going to be this giant, oh my gosh, what do we do? They ought to be doing it now. Governor Hochul, Governor Newsom, these governors ought to be doing it. And other states, other cities, Salt Lake City is booming. Texas is booming. Many of the states that did it differently and it put people back to work have gotten themselves back to functioning. It's the states that took this position of, don't come back to the office forever and ever. Man, is it going to be expensive to fix it.
Okay. Well, John, I want to thank you very much. Jesse and I deeply appreciate you coming on. We've been speaking to John Chachas, who's an investment banker, finance expert, media expert, common sense guy, my neighbor here in the building where we operate WABC out of, and somebody who deeply cares about this country and deeply cares about the future of our cities. We've been very fortunate to have you on today. Jesse and I want to thank you again, and we hope to have you with us again in the not too distant future. Thank you very much, John.
Real pleasure. Nice to meet you, Jesse.
Thank you, John.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show. With me is my good friend and esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party, as well as the County Chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party. We're joined for this final segment of Let the Record Show with Bobby Ann Cox, a very distinguished lawyer, a fellow Democrat, I might add, who has the same problem with the Democratic Party in New York as I do, which is taken over by a radical fringe. She changed the nature of her law practice, and I had the opportunity to chat with her over the weekend last Saturday. She changed the nature of law practice because she was so aghast at what was happening to New York City and New York State and the drift of the Democratic Party and its very bad public policies harming New York. So welcome, Bobby Ann Cox, to Let the Record Show. We're very, very happy to have you here. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background and why you changed the nature of your practice and now doing these great constitutional challenges?
Yes, absolutely. First, thank you both for having me on the show. It's great to be here. I've been practicing law here in New York for 25 years. And my practice before COVID was based in real estate and specifically property tax certiorari work. And so I had always been used to going up against government and agencies and local government. But once COVID hit in March of 2020 and we saw this just really obvious government overreach going on. The lockdowns, for one, were completely outrageous. Cuomo did not have the power to tell people to stay in their homes and shutter their businesses and close schools. And, the lockdowns, 2 weeks to flatten the curve was what he originally said. But we all know that lasted months and was destroying the economy in New York. I saw this going on, and I knew instinctively, as an attorney, I just knew this was not possibly legal. So I started to get involved with the constitutional law side of things. And it was really, in 2021, it was really obvious to me with this isolation and quarantine procedures regulation that somebody had brought to my attention that the executive branch had gone wild.
Tell us about what this quarantine regulation was, the Hochul Department of Health state quarantine regulation.
Yeah, so this was a regulation, and just, so your listeners understand the difference, a law comes through the legislature. Our state senators and our state assembly members pass the laws, but the agencies which sit under the executive branch, they sit under the governor, Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Transportation. Those are all agencies in the executive branch. They make regulations. Another word for that is rules. And this was a rule or a regulation made by the Department of Health. This did not go through the New York State legislature, but it gave the Commissioner of Health in New York State the power to pick and choose which New Yorkers they could lock up or lock down. Now, they could have locked you down in your home, or they could have removed you from your home with the force of police and put you into a facility of their choosing.
And if they came to my home and I didn't want to go with my wife and children, what would happen to me?
They could arrest you.
So in other words, they're claiming it was a lawful arrest pursuant to this administrative regulation, and I had no choice but to submit and to go with them. Now, what happens if I decide I want to get out? I didn't like being quarantined in some dorm somewhere. How did I get out?
Well, this regulation said that the Commissioner of Health, or whoever she appointed, could tell you how long you would be locked up or locked down. So they arbitrarily would decide how long you sat there in either in a facility or in your home. And there was no procedure for you to get out once you were in quarantine.
So there's no regulatory, in other words, there's no way to make an application to this regulatory body, the Department of Health. What about going to court? Would I have to get a writ of habeas corpus or something like that to get myself out of this lockup?
Right. So we had oral arguments last year in front of the trial court judge, and that was an exact question that he asked the Attorney General's office. He said, let's say you take a family, let's say you put them into a facility, a hospital, for example. Once they're in quarantine, how do they get out? And, there was a really pregnant pause. And then finally, the Attorney General's office said, well, I guess they could hire a lawyer and they could sue us. So they literally said, you need to hire a lawyer and file an Article 78 proceeding against the Department of Health to get out of quarantine. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And how do you do it? How do you do logistics when you're isolated, you're by yourself, you don't have real access to your accounts or family, friends, or connections. You're locked away in some facility. And how do you get a lawyer to get you out?
That's right. That's exactly right. And the judge wrote that in his decision. He said
good,
exactly
good,
that.
Good. It's a good thing I used to be a judge. I asked the right question.
That's right.
Jesse,
That's
your
right.
turn.
Ms. Cox, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your great work on this. I mean, it really is work for all of our freedoms and such. As you were going through the analysis of this, where did you see the breakdown was where it seemed where the legislature abdicated its responsibility in this, and why they were so silent on allowing this to move forward? Obviously, the constituents in these jurisdictions must have reached out to them and said this is not playing fair. Where do you see the problem where the legislature failed in truly being a checks and balances?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe the masses, I mean, some New Yorkers did know about this regulation, but the masses did not. And so when I read this regulation, right, and I said, somebody showed it to me and said, is this for real? Like, this is crazy. And I read it and I said, unfortunately, it's for real, but there's no way it's legal. And it was a situation where I had to come up with a cause of action because, they weren't actually, the Department of Health wasn't actually enforcing this. They weren't removing people from their homes that I knew of, and putting them into facilities. So, to have a cause of action, you have to have an injury. And the injury that I thought of was, well, the legislature is being injured here because the governor and the Department of Health have made a regulation which breaches separation of powers, right? We already have a quarantine law. We've had a quarantine law for 70 years here in New York State, right? Most states, if not all states, do have a quarantine law, but that law is full of due process protections, right? The number one thing that law says is that the person has to actually have the communicable disease that you think they have. This regulation, they didn't even have to prove you were sick, let alone, exposed to a communicable disease. So my plaintiffs in this case are a group of New York State legislators.
Who were they?
That's Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Tague, and then Assemblyman Mike Lawler, who's now Congressman Mike Lawler, and together with a citizens group called Uniting New York State. And of course, the Attorney General had challenged our standing, but we won on that point. And now the governor is appealing, and they're hitting heavy on the standing. They're trying to knock out the case.
So
on appeal.
So they've stayed. Am I correct? They've stayed the implementation of this regulation?
The regulation has been struck down. It's no longer in effect, and they cannot enforce it.
Right.
So the regulation no longer exists, but now that the state is appealing, they want the power back. So we'll see. We're in the 4th Department Appellate Division up in Rochester, and those oral arguments are coming up in September. But this case goes far beyond just quarantining, forcibly quarantining people that may or may not be sick. for however long the state wants. You know, if the appellate division reverses this decision, it is going to send a signal to agencies around the state and probably outside New York State as well, telling them that they can make any kind of regulation they want, any rule you want. It doesn't matter if it conflicts with existing laws. It doesn't matter if it conflicts with existing, constitutional provisions. Just do what you want, and this case is precedent now, or at least it's suggestive that you can do whatever you want, agencies, and, what is that going to do? That's going to completely destroy separation of powers, because separation of powers is 3 co-equal branches of government. And if the executive branch can start making rules that conflict with laws made by the legislature, we are in big trouble.
Well, let me ask you this question, which is something that, again, you and I chatted about over the weekend, which is a matter of great concern to Chairman Garcia and myself. We live in New York State. It's a one-party state. And what's the implications of having a one-party state? So you've been fighting for separation of powers, but in a very real sense, how do you have separation of powers and checks and balances when you have a one-party state?
Yeah, that is a huge problem that we are facing in New York. For the past 5 years, the Democrats have had a supermajority in the New York State legislature. Anybody that's not clear what that means, it just means that there are so many Democrats sitting in our state Senate and in our state assembly. Even if the governor wanted to veto a bill that the state Senate and the assembly passed, the Democrats could override the veto because they have a supermajority. They have so many members of the Democratic Party in there. That is so dangerous because when one party has complete control, right? They've got the supermajority in the Senate, supermajority in the assembly. They've got the governor's mansion, and they've got the attorney general's office. So it's one-party rule on steroids. You don't have two sides in an equation there. You don't have a conversation going. You have one party saying what they're going to do. If you don't like it, tough, leave, right? We have to break that. We have to get back to some sort of balance of power.
Well, it's even more troubling, and Jesse and I have been talking about this on our show for a long time. One of the things you could hope is that you have an independent judiciary that would be a check against overreach by the legislature on constitutional measures, as well as by administrative agencies and the governor. And what's happened is you have the leadership of the Democrats in the state Senate using their power of advice and consent over judicial nominees, and particularly the Court of Appeals, where they blew out the chief judge of the state of New York, and she resigned. They rejected the nomination of Governor Hochul's first choice, an esteemed judge, and they made sure that they got in somebody who they thought, and I don't know the gentleman, I have no idea about him. He's supposed to be a very decent person, a very smart, good law person. I don't know. But they made sure that they got rid of people who they thought might be adverse to their positions, which raises the question, there is no checks and balance even in the sense of an independent judiciary, because the legislature is going to control who's on the bench, and there may be result-oriented decision going along with their political, ideological agenda. What do you say about that?
Yeah, the politicalization of our courts is extremely dangerous. We absolutely have to reverse that trend. We cannot have – the courts are supposed to be the branch of government that decides, when the other two branches are fighting over power issues, it's supposed to be the judiciary that decides that dispute, right? And it's supposed to be in accordance with our Constitution. So
good luck with that.
Yeah, well, we can't have this one-party slant where the Democrats are trying to maneuver or control or manipulate what goes on in the courts. That is so dangerous. People have to understand the importance of voting. And, it's really not about left or right, Republican or Democrat. It's about being an American, and it's about upholding our Constitution. We are in big trouble if we don't break this one-party rule. The New York State Senate, we only need 11 seats to flip that state body from Democrat-controlled to Republican-controlled. 11 seats throughout the whole state of New York. And elections are next November. It's about, 13, 15 months from now. It's definitely doable, and that has to be the goal. Look, even if it was the Republicans with a supermajority and they were the ones that were going,
you'd be saying the same thing.
I'd be saying the same thing.
Of course you would. Jesse, I'll give you the final word. I've just gotten that sign from Kevin.
Yeah, we were talking about the separation of powers and such, but the judiciary being politicized and such. But what concerns me with this is the fact that they're establishing a far more powerful entity, and that's the entrenched bureaucracy within these agencies. That it's a pencil pusher, an unelected individual that can simply establish a new regulation if this case is not successful at the appellate division. Am I right in that?
No, you are 100% correct. We run the risk of having, people call it a regulation nation, right? So it's the regulations being made by, like you said, unelected bureaucrats sitting in these agencies. They're not elected. You can't vote them in and out. If they do things that you don't like, they make rules or regs that you don't like, you can't go to the polls and vote them out. They're appointed. So that's the whole reason why we have separation of powers. We're supposed to be able to vote in and out the people that make our laws. The people that make regulations sitting there in agencies, they're not supposed to have this incredible power. They're not supposed to be able to undo what the legislature is doing. That's tyranny. When one branch of government, the executive in this case, takes a power that belongs to another branch, that's tyranny. We cannot have a tyrannical situation in the state. If this happens in New York State, it's going to spread to other states in our country, without doubt. New York is the trailblazer, whether for good or for bad. What happens in New York spreads.
It's California and New York. It's two coastal states that have always been the leaders in these trends. Well, Bobby Ann Cox, Esquire, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Jesse and I would love to have you back to talk to you about the future of our city and our state. I'd love to see a good victory for you in the appellate division, and hopefully, if it goes to the Court of Appeals, an honest decision from the Court of Appeals sustaining your earlier victory and protecting the public and the people of this great state. This has been Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia. We've just finished our conversation with Bobby Ann Cox, Esquire, a great lawyer and a great patriot, and we appreciate you being here, Bobby, and thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you both for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Stay tuned for our sign-off, which is God Bless America, especially on the tail end of the July 4th weekend. This is the greatest country we've ever had, ever will be. We look forward to speaking with you next week. Thanks again for listening.
God bless America. Thank you.